Okay, hi guys, back today, and we're going to get back into our Beginner Witch series. It was pouring all day today, so as soon as the weather is decent for a day at least, and I can do a video outside, I want to get like the ritual part of it done outside. Because ideally you want to do as many of your rituals outside as you can. Now sometimes, living in the Northeast, there's no way I can do, like Imbolc, especially Imbolc is one of the ones that I never get to do outside because it's in February and it's like, not going to happen. In New York, there's feet of snow. Now you can do a piece of it outside. Sometimes it's too hot, it's too muggy, it's raining, so there'll be different ways, but I want to show you the ideal way first, and then we'll talk about kind of how to switch it up a little bit if you can't be outside. Today, though, since we couldn't be outside, I'm going to skip ahead because something happened this week. I was doing a reading with someone who wanted to know how to find her goddess, like what goddess or god or both she should choose as a goddess to start calling out to. So that's a very good question, and there's several ways to do that. I know when I first became pagan, I did not choose a specific like matron goddess or patron god. I didn't choose that for probably a couple years. I just called out to a generic lord and lady or god and goddess, and that's okay. Especially at first, because when you're first starting out, there's a lot of research to do. And you're not going to know all the gods and goddesses. Like you may know some of them from history and that kind of thing. Greek mythology and all that, but there's so many different pantheons that you can go with that you're not going to know right away who does what and all that, and that's okay. So to start out with, you might want to just start out calling out to Lord and Lady or God and Goddess or both. That's okay. If you are starting out and you have felt drawn kind of all your life to a certain pantheon. Okay, so what do we mean by pantheon? Pantheon is like a sect of gods and goddesses, of practice. So it would be like Celtic is one kind of sect. And there's different gods and goddesses for a Celtic sect. I personally believe that you can mix your pantheons. I do. Some witches are very strict about things and want you to only stick with one pantheon. That doesn't work for me. Part of the reason why I went into paganism is because I wanted to do what worked for me. That doesn't mean that anybody is wrong in telling you to stick to one pantheon. Some people, if you train under a specific sect of Wicca or a specific sect of paganism, they want you to stay within that pantheon, and that's okay. For instance, I know I am a member of the Sisterhood of Avalon, and when I am doing work with the Sisterhood of Avalon, I need to there's specific goddesses for the Avalonian traditions that you will work with when you're being a part of that group, and so that's okay. So I think the easiest way to do it, first of all, is to look at, have you been called to in your lifetime a specific pantheon? Have you always really loved Egyptian history and ancient Egyptian readings and stuff like that? Then you might want to look at the Egyptian pantheons. Gods and goddesses, lots of different. Have you always been very curious about Celtics? Then you might want to start looking there. There's so many African. There's specific African gods and goddesses. South America, there's specific Mayan, Aztec gods and goddesses. So if you are called to a specific area of the earth or a specific sect of paganism, then start there. If you're not called to that, or you haven't ever been called to that, the next thing you can look at is your specific heritage. Sometimes it helps. Like I like to say, when I look at my heritage, I am Danish, Irish, and English, mostly. There's a whole bunch of other stuff mixed in there too. But, so I like to say that I am a Viking, a Druid, and a Celt. Druid, Viking, Celt. Yes. So that gave me a start of where to start looking for that kind of thing. The good thing is now there is a million different books. There's a million different websites. If you're following my Pinterest, I have a whole entire board. It's called Gods and Goddesses, that I have put in a bunch of information on only the gods and goddesses and all different kinds of gods and goddesses. So you can look there. Once you've looked at your heritage, then you can look at, do you have in your life recurring symbols or patterns in your life? So sometimes you see a whole bunch of crows all the time. Or ravens. That may tell you that Morgana is calling, Morgan Le Fay or Morgana is calling to you specifically to be your matron goddess. That's possible. What else? Egyptian. If you're seeing like the Egyptian Sphinx everywhere, then it's time to look at, the Egyptian gods and goddesses. Odin. Sometimes people are like, wow, all of a sudden all this Viking stuff and Odin and Odinism and Thor and all that stuff. I always was very interested in that. All right, then look at that Germanic pantheon. And that's, a basic outline anyway of where you can start. So then let's say you have figured out kind of what pantheon you want to go to. So I have a bunch of books here. Hold on, I'll try to show you without showing you too much of my mess. So this is goes all the way down. That's all the books that I have on gods and goddesses. So I'm going to go over a little bit. I'm not going to look in each book because we're already almost 10 minutes here. But I'm going to go over a little bit of where you can start. Okay, so probably the easiest way to start is Bulfinch's Mythology. So when you're starting out, and you should be able to get this out of any library. This is a very famous text that has a ton of the stories of gods and goddesses in here. And I have actually 2 copies, I think, of Bulfinch's, which I believe I have another copy. So if anyone is interested, I would trade the other copy that I have. But it's very extensive. Okay, so it talks about a lot of the Greek and Roman, and it has all the stories for each of these gods and goddesses, okay? So it talks about Prometheus and Pandora, Apollo and Daphne, Juno and her rivals, Midas, Pygmalion, Vertumnus and Pomona, Cupid and Psyche, Nissus and Scylla, Minerva and Arachne, and anyone that you have heard of and you think, oh yeah, I think I kind of remember. Like I love the goddess Arachne. I think that's a really cool and interesting story. And I do specifically call out to Arachne once in a while because I was really afraid of spiders. I'm still not in love with spiders, but I tried to kind of get over my fear a little bit. And so I use the goddess Arachne to help me with that. Hercules, the Golden Fleece, Theseus and Dalius, Bacchus and Ariadne, Orpheus. So that goes through all of that. And then it goes into Northern mythology. So Valhalla and Thor and Odin. And it goes into Druids. Eastern mythology. So Buddha, Hindu. Pythagoras, Egyptian deities and oracles. It goes through King Arthur and his knights. So it goes through Avalonian traditions. The Mabignon, that is Celtic. So it goes through that pantheon. Charlemagne, British. Goes through all that. So there is a ton of gods and goddesses. Lots of information in that. Okay. So that is maybe the first place I would start before you start buying books. I'll tell you, there's a couple that I really, really recommend. And we'll get to that at the end, okay? Any books that you find, I pick up mythology books all the time for this purpose, especially to look up gods and goddesses, because they're great to have the stories of the gods and goddesses. Sometimes when you look at different sabbats, there's a specific god and goddess story in there, and it's a very short excerpt, and you can find a longer version that has a lot more detail in a mythology book. So I pick up mythology books. Every time, like, there's a library sale or something, you can look in mythology. This is from Patricia Telesco, who I have several of her books. This is God and Goddess, exploring and celebrating two sides of Wiccan deity. So this is a specific book on gods and goddesses. And it has all kinds of stories in here about goddesses, maiden, or daughters. So then it goes through the maiden goddesses: Artemis, Kori, Persephone, the Vietnamese dragon maiden, other maiden goddesses. Then it goes through, eventually here it should go, God is friend and goddess's friend. And it'll tell you different gods and goddesses for that. God is lover, husband. It'll go through and tell you different goddesses and gods for lovers. So, goddess at work, goddess of the hearth and home, God is father, goddess is mother. So this one goes through a little bit differently. It goes through kind of the different archetypes of gods and goddesses, and then tells you a god or goddess for that archetype. So if you really have felt drawn to a god of the hunt, or a god of nature like the Green Man or Cernunnos, then that'll tell you about that. This one is The Great Goddess, an introduction to her many names. And this is by Martha Ann, Dorothy Imo, Lee Redfield, and Barbara Sutter. And this is a very short introduction of a bunch of different goddesses. This one is, I believe, just goddesses. So you can look up two different ways. You can look up Africa, and it will tell you a little excerpt of a bunch of African goddesses. Then it goes to Egypt. And again, just a little excerpt here of a bunch of goddesses. So then when you look in here and you think, oh wait, and same thing, India, then it goes through Japanese, Mesoamerican, Mesopotamia, North America. So now we're going into like Native American, Semitic speaking people. So like Jewish gods and goddesses, and further readings. So once you find one in here that you're like, oh, I'm interested in that, then you can go to a more in-depth on that specific goddess. This is The Goddesses, Myth and Stories by Lindell Barker Revel. And again, anytime, I'm telling you, I just, especially like library sales and thrift books and that kind of thing, I have all kinds of books on gods and goddesses for just this purpose. There's a whole bunch on Isis. So this one goes through specific goddesses and tells lots of information on each of the goddesses that they go through. And this one has, so it has all of these goddesses. So ancient mother goddess, Aphrodite, Ariadne, Artemis, Athena, Circe, Daphne, Demeter, Flora, Hathor, Isis, Kali, Kuan Yin, Leda, Medea, Pandora, Pele, Psyche, Sekhmet, Snake Goddess. So that's a mix of pantheons too, and that goes through a bunch of information on each of those goddesses. This one is Gods in Every Man. So this one, there's two different books for this, and this is both by Jean Shinoda Bolen. She's a doctorate, and I believe, what is she? The Jungian, Carl Jung. So Jungian analyst and clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. So she wrote a book of goddesses in every woman and gods in every man. So one will have goddesses and one will have gods. She takes specific archetypes and brings them to several specific goddesses. So I think there's 7. I think she chose 7 in each, one for each archetype. So the goddesses she goes through are the virgin goddesses, Artemis, Athena, and Hestia. Then Artemis, goddess of the hunt and moon, competitor and sister. Athena, Hestia, Hera, Demeter, and Persephone. Hera, Demeter, Persephone. So very specifics on each of them. The alchemical goddesses, which are Aphrodite, and the heroine goddess, and goes through each individual. So that she goes by archetypes. And then for the gods, it's the same thing, and there's specifics. So fathers and sons. So the father archetype, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and has specific stuff for each of them. The generation of the sons, Apollo, Hermes, Ares, Hephaestus, and Dionysus. Goes through very specific things for each of them. Finding our myths, remembering ourselves, and the missing god. So that's 2 great books for that too. Encyclopedia of Gods, over 2,500 deities of the world. Again, this is probably one I got at a library sale. I look in the myths section when you go to a library sale. People don't realize that they definitely can be used for god and goddess research. So, and this goes from A to Z. So it starts with A, and there's a little blurb on each of the deities here. So again, great book for it. Keep on the lookout for anything like that. This one is Goddess Alive, inviting Celtic and Norse goddesses into your life. And this one is by Michelle Skye. And she has a couple. She has Goddesses Alive, and then there's like 2 other books that are kind of in this series, I believe. And this must be the first one. There's at least one. Goddess Alive and Goddess Afoot, maybe? Can't remember. So this is specifically Norse and Celtic goddesses. So this says the turning of the year. So this gives you goddesses for each phase, each Sabbath. So the winter solstice is Caradwin, Imbolc is Brigitte. The spring equinox is Ostara. Beltane is Freya. Summer solstice is Ain, Irish goddess of fairies and fertility. And then it also gives you the phases of the moon. So for the waxing moon, there's Branwen, and that was just an example. It keeps going with all the Sabbats there. But waxing moon is Branwen, the Welsh goddess of sovereignty. Full moon is Maeve, Irish goddess of personal power, and so on. So that, if one of your goddesses is in there, that's another great resource. What are we at? 20 minutes. Okay. The Goddess Within, a guide to the eternal myths that shape women's lives. That's another really good book. And again, this one goes into specific goddesses and has lots of information and goes back to the feminine aspects of these goddesses. So part 1 is the Goddess Wheel, introducing the Goddess Wheel and overview. Then it has Athena, Artemis, Aphrodite, Hera, Persephone, and Demeter. Then integrating the goddesses. Which goddesses are you ruled by? Reconciling your inner goddesses for women. Living with the goddesses for men. Games goddesses play. A brief history of goddess psychology. Lots of information about those specific goddesses. Okay, so now we come to, these next 3 books are the 3 that I would recommend. If you have a chance to get these books, these are the 3 that I started out with when I first started out, actually it's when I found my coven, my first coven. My leader, David, gave me, I think he definitely gave me this book, this is The Goddess Guide. So this was the first book I ever looked at when I was looking for my specific goddess. And this goes through the goddesses in different ways. So you can look up in this book. Let me get to the contents here. So you can look up the goddesses. You can look it up by name. So if you're like, oh yeah, I want to look up Artemis and see what they say about Artemis. This is kind of the beginning. It just gives you a little bit of information on each of the goddesses. So let me find Artemis here. And my glasses. So this is, it says, the Greek goddess of the hunt. Artemis is the Olympian goddess of the wilderness and ruler of forests, woodlands, and wild animals. Also known as a goddess of childbirth, Artemis is the protector of young girls until they reach the age of marriage. As the virgin huntress, she is the personification of independence and self-reliance and the defender of the weak and abused. Artemis is usually depicted as a young woman holding a bow and arrow. The deer, the bear, and the cypress tree are sacred to her. So if you were pregnant, maybe you want to choose Artemis to work with for a while because she is the goddess of childbirth. If you were someone who was abused as a child, she is a specific defender for those who have been abused and the weak. If you are, feel like you're a hunter in nature, you might want to go with her. Then, after that section, you can go through all that section. Then it goes to attributes. So let's say you're not sure yet of the goddess, but you're gonna find out, I want to pick a goddess that's really good with dance. I'm a dancer and I really want to go with a goddess that's good for dance. So you look up in this book dance, and it has all the goddesses, just their names of dance. So we have Enahit, Bast, Benton, Brogla, Calliope, Sybil, Devi, Ostra, Reshgagal, And it lists all that. So then you can take that and go back to the goddesses and look up some more information about that goddess and pick that way. Then I think there's one more. It goes by colors. So it'll go by colors. Let's say purple is my favorite color. So you look up purple and it will list all the goddesses. That purple is their royal color for their goddesses. So whatever that is, Paxapo, Amegmem, Ain, Aya, Aneth, Banba, Bast, Bellona, Brogla, Kaliak, Caradwin. So, and it goes through all that. So that's good. The colors. Then it goes to the elements. Let's say you know you're an earth person. So you want to pick an earth god. Goes through all of that. We'll tell you all the earth-based goddesses. Fire, air, water. The wheel of the year. So let's say you were born on Beltane. And you feel like Beltane is your Sabbath. So then you go to Beltane. Look up that goddess that way. This is a really good reference to be able to look up when you're first starting out, because it just gives you a little bit of information, but it does it in several different ways so that you can kind of pick that different way. Okay, the other two books, one is called The Witch's Goddess and The Witch's God. So one is for goddesses alone and one is for God alone. They are both by Janet and Stuart Farrar. I never know how to say that. They're very famous pagan authors. I have no idea how to say it. Farrar, I bet. This is very good at in-depth. It gives you lots of information about each goddess. It gives you lots of correspondences and stories, and it's just like rituals. It'll give you a ritual for your chosen goddess. So once you have an idea of what goddess, then you kind of go into these books and say, okay, I want to choose Arianrod. It will give you poems about Arianrod. It gives you the family of Dana Don, which is the line of Arianrod. Gives you stories about how Arianrod came to be. Then an Arianrod ritual and how to set up for that ritual. So these two books are really good at in-depth. Once you find a goddess or a god that you think, oh yes, this is the one I want to try to work with. Now again, you don't have to pick a goddess and a god. You can just work with a goddess. If you've had enough of working with male deities for a while. It took me a while to come back around and want to work with a god after I had left Christianity, because it was kind of all about the patriarch part. So I felt like I had gotten enough of the masculine deity for a while. It took me a couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years, to come back around to, and now I am mostly with Cernunnos. I also work with Hearn, Pan, and the Green Man. So that's who I work with as God-wise. It depends on what I'm looking for, what I'm, holding that energy up for. And then you don't have to have a matron goddess either. You can just call out to the Lord and Lady. You can call out to a specific goddess if you're looking for a specific thing. And like my matron goddess, because I was a Libra, I chose Maat of the Egyptian pantheon as my first matron goddess. And that was because she's incredibly balanced, and she is all about justice. And as a Libra, that was like one of the most important things for me. And so I still use Maat a whole lot. I would say probably is still my matron goddess. But I pull in a lot of different goddesses for different rituals, for different energies that I'm trying to work with. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I have a whole board called Gods and Goddesses on my Pinterest page. So I will try to link my Pinterest page down below again. Hopefully we'll have a decent day so we can get back to ritual. I'm going to try to start a video for Mabon, since Mabon is this month. And if you like what you see and you want to support me, I will put my Patreon stuff down there. I am very appreciative of my Patreon users, and I swear here's my Patreon supporters. Now I do have a supporter who wanted to remain anonymous, so I do not put her on my final credits here. And I believe I just picked up a supporter today, so I have to go look that up. But I appreciate you coming, and hopefully you learned something. Ask anything you want, no problem, and I'll see you soon. Blessings.